Hey, and welcome to another episode of our limited series of I Want to Live to 100. Please tell me how. I've got an amazing guest on today. That her world is something I want to sit next to her and just shadow her all the time because it's right up my street. Welcome, Dr. Simmy.
Hi. Thanks, Nick. What an intro.
Well, do you know what? It's like when I read your bio and everything that you do, I just want to sit and follow you with a notebook. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Before we get stuck in, one thing when I was doing a little bit of research with you is your clinic. It's called the 9 Clinic in London, isn't it?
It is.
There's an interesting story about the 9. Where did that come from and why?
Yeah. So actually, when I first started the clinic, obviously the first thing you do is you try and sort of find a place for it. And so the first place that we got was in 9 Elms, which is a new development in central London. And I was drawn to the number 9 anyway, because it's a nice number. But actually 9 in numerology means new beginnings. And in a way, this was a big new beginning for me. It was a big new beginning for the team. And, you know, in some ways, it's never too late to have a new beginning in your health. So I thought it was a nice kind of number name. And there's always the temptation, isn't there, to, you know, call yourself, you know, a clinic based on the street name or based on wherever it may be, Marylebone, Chelsea. So I thought actually 9 was nice because it's not just based on the location. It's a nice overall number. Yeah, you know, yeah.
But it's just...
There are a whole number of names that we thought of originally, but that's the one that sort of stood out.
Yeah, and that last comment you were saying when you're talking about the 9, and it's never too late to start, you know, and I think, you know, that's a perfect sort of bridge into my next question is where do you sit in the world of longevity? Because it's everywhere now, isn't it? You know, and there's lots of words being put about on social media and in the press. And I mean, the industry's doing that. And, you know, it does get confusing for people listening, even people that know stuff. But before we delve into that, where do you sit in the world of longevity?
You know, I think, Nick, that's a really good question because at the moment, I would say there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of trends, fads going on. You know, influencers that have little or no credibility, you know, in the industry, yet, you know, people are listening to them. So I would say one of the biggest issues at the moment is the sort of false noise and the, you know, people talking about longevity when they really don't know that much or enough about it. So I guess where I stand in it all is, so I'm a general practitioner, so we're generalists. You know, longevity, preventative medicine, this is stuff that we do every single day and we have a medical background. So I think what's nice is that things are sort of going that way. So prevention is better than cure, whereas in the olden days, you know, we would wait for people to become sick before we see them. So I think what's nice about what we can do now is that, you know, we've really tried to position ourselves in a way that, you know, obviously you need your GP when you're sick to help you get better, but we're also really encouraging our patients to take ownership of their health and, you know, really try and become the most healthy person that they can be.
Well, that again, brilliant. Just leads me on to my next question then, is how much of our current health and our future health is actually in our own hands then? I
mean, I would say a lot, you know, so the term healthy itself, you know, what is health to you? So health to, you know, it depends on your age. It depends on if you're a man or a woman. It depends on what your goals are. You know, if you're, you know, somebody who is coming towards the end of their life, you know, their goal may be to be the healthiest that they can be. They want to be more energized. Whereas, you know, somebody who's pregnant will have a completely different kind of goal. You know, we do, you know, it really is in our hands. And there are some very basic things that we can do, like, you know, making sure that what we eat, you know, is the best that it can be. So, you know, optimizing your diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management as well is another big thing. So, you know, all of these factors are in our hands. They are controllable. There's certain factors like genetics, for example, that, you know, are always going to be challenging because some people just, you know, will be unfortunate and, you know, and aren't dealt the best cards in life. which is really rubbish. But, there are things that we can do. So they can really, impact on your overall health. Because if you think about it, they are the modifiable risk factors. So these are factors that we talk about in medicine that you can control. So I would say yes, they do play a big, big part.
The interesting thing, isn't it? It's when we look at the wellness industry as a whole and what we're told and sold to and everything like that, it's like actually being healthy and your version of healthy, you said it yourself. What does healthy mean to you? Not everyone wants a bloody bulging biceps and six packs and things like that. And most of those people doesn't mean that they're genuinely healthy anyway, just because aesthetically they look a certain way. What is healthy to you? And actually being healthy is quite boring, isn't it? It is the basics. It's like sleep, like you said, stress management, recovery, nutrition, hydration, right? And movement, isn't it? It's like, and they've been the things that have moved the dial 10 years ago and will still be the things that move the dial in 10 years time. I don't think, not putting it down on science. Science is incredibly important, but science is explorative. It's always changing. They always find something and then they adjust and then they find something, and in science terms, they're always looking for things not to work, and pull it apart. So that's why it changes so much. Whereas, biology, they're not going to say in 5 years' time, yeah, that sleep thing we've been telling you about, yeah, don't do that anymore.
Well,
and it is pretty basic, isn't it?
Yeah. And things are changing all the time. New research is coming out all the time. And, we have to adapt with that. So there is an element of, quite often the advice that we give is based on the evidence base right now. But things change and, you got to live your life. You've got to have some fun. Yes, the fundamentals are very boring. But, in moderation, life is for living.
Absolutely. Well, and that from your professional point of view, do you find that actually now there's too much information, too much like trends happening, too much people going, oh, this new thing. I mean, professionally, you have to keep up with it because obviously your clients are going to come in. They'll have seen that person talking about it. So they're going to ask you about it. But do you wish that some of it would just stop? So
yeah.
You could just focus on the, what is working.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's kind of good because we're definitely way more conscious about our health now. So people, the conversation is happening and, health span, lifespan, it's important. So I think, when we talk about sort of, the positive effects of this, I think people are, like we mentioned earlier, taking more accountability for themselves and being more aware of how important it is to be healthy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny that you talked about earlier in what was the point that I was trying to get to? Because when you were talking about what we can do and everything in moderation, but also it being fun.
Mm-hmm.
Is we know that, and I've definitely gone through this part of my life where I become so obsessed with something that actually that stress it was causing on my body was not having, I was not getting the benefit of the thing I was doing because I was so stressed about doing it so well and things like that.
Yeah.
Health is, good when you do have some fun with it and things like that. So I totally get that. But another point you made was when you said that, not everyone's dealt at the certain cards when it comes to health. We're talking about genetics. Mm-hmm. Now we know that there's a saying, I've said it before in this podcast, genetics is, the loaded gun, the epigenetics or your lifestyle is what pulls the trigger. Is this where you think that prevent testing could come in? Because, there's lots of people that are going, I'm doing all these things well, but I don't seem to be getting the results.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that's where, that testing can come? And there's all levels of testing, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, 100%. And at the most basic level, what you want to be doing is an annual health check. Depending on, how old you are, depending on, the means that you have. That's one of the very, very, very basic things that you can do for yourself. And, an annual health check, with your GP or with TMTC or whatever whatever company it may be, would consist of speaking to the doctor about your history, having an examination, doing some lab tests, doing some scanning if you need to, and really just getting an overview on where you're at. And then based on those results, you can then sort of, start to create some health goals. And I think one really, really important thing to do is make sure it's sustainable, because like you say, sometimes it can become quite overwhelming, and, you may start to think, okay, there are like so many things I need to do. You become stressed about it. So, do little things that are sustainable. Now, that might be something like, you might have a sweet tooth. Well, cut down on the sugar. Or, you may not be exercising that much. Well, get off the tube one step before, one stop before, where you're due, or, get off the bus at a certain time, just so you can walk that, a couple of minutes. But doing little things, making small changes will eventually lead to bigger changes, but they'll be made way more sustainable. And actually, what we find is when patients start feeling better, so when they're making these little changes, something goes off in their brain and they start thinking, oh, actually, I can do this. And it leads to a domino effect. So, you could start off with the smallest thing, but as long as it's sustainable, you'll get to where you want to get.
Yeah, I use this analogy when you mention domino effect, is like, for me, and I know lots of people that I've worked with, is if I do one thing in the morning, and it might be something small, like just a little routine just to wake my body up or something like that. If that's my first domino that I push, then we know that obviously it gets bigger and bigger with the dominoes, but it's so much easier to then maintain a healthier day.
That's it.
When you started your day off well.
Yeah.
And likewise, the night before impacts your morning. So like if you're going to bed and you haven't given yourself the best opportunity to get a great night's sleep, that may be eating late, too much stimulation, alcohol, and then so you're setting yourself up in the morning. It's a lot harder to wake up and do those things that are going to make you feel good, isn't it? It is funny, but that dominoes thing from a visual point of view, I think is incredibly powerful. Talking about the testing and your testing, TMTC, the medical travel company, I was very lucky enough to have lots and lots of scans done. As I've said before, what was amazing when I got the report back is I'd never had a report with so many A's in. I was super proud. So showed my mum. But was there anything that you saw from my results, again, from what you do day in, day out, that you were going, okay, I mean, there's clearly some good there, but here's some things I would be focusing on if you'd come in to see me?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was very impressed in general. The results were really great, really good. And the whole point of doing these tests and reviews is to find things that we can work on. Now, compared to the average person, your results were very good. So an average person of, your age, gender, etc. So yeah, in terms of that, hydration status was excellent. I can see that you've been, drinking plenty of water, probably electrolytes as well. Your social connection, that was a very good outcome for you, which is so important, as human beings, to have that social connection is really, really essential for health. And we can talk more about that later. But nothing really bad. But, actually going back to the things that we spoke about right at the beginning, the things that we picked up on were the sleep, exercise, nutrition. So they were, I think, 3 points for you that, little tweaks, things that you could improve on. I mean, sleep is a mammoth, isn't it? Sleep is a beast. And we can all do with more sleep. And it's very, very complex, subject and something that we speak to our patients about, pretty much every single day. But I think generally for you, improving the sleep in any way that we can, or giving suggestions or help with that, following on from your consultation, the actual health check itself, and coming up with some steps that could really help to improve your sleep would be a good one for you. Exercise is very good. There's always things that we can tweak and add in. At this point, lifting is really important. Vascular exercise, which you're doing, this is all really important for bone health and, nutrition. We can all be better, but there's a balance, isn't there? You've got to live your life. But, at the same time, I think the choices that we make need to be mindful. simple things like avoiding processed foods, avoiding any refined sugar, basic things that, the common sense things are really important on a day-to-day level.
Do you know what? It's really interesting because a couple of pointers there that you made. Now I live in Spain. Obviously, the culture out here is to eat late, go to bed late. And it's so funny. There's quite an expat community here, and there's lots of Brits. So you know who's British because you see them in the restaurant, right, at 6, 7 o'clock having dinner. Right?
Yeah, and we order chips.
Exactly. And then the Spanish go in for dinner at 10 o'clock.
That's it. Yeah.
So that challenge of trying to have a regular bedtime when it's still beautiful outside, there's still lots going on and things like that. And then, everyone does it, even in England in the summer. You think you normally in the winter you're having dinner like 5, 6 o'clock, maybe 7 o'clock or something. But then all of a sudden it's a longer day, it's brighter, you're still on the beach or you're still outside. Yeah. The next minute you're going, oh gosh, it's 8:30 and I haven't had dinner, so you're naturally eating later. It is that balance between enjoying the environment that you're in and obviously sticking with what works for you, because certainly sleep for me, that half an hour difference within 2 or 3 days, I notice it.
Yeah.
We were talking about that nighttime behavior and how it impacts the morning behavior. That for me, I can massively feel that. It's almost like that at that half an hour less, because I naturally wake up at the same time, that half an hour less of going to bed, it's like waking up with your phone now only on 70%, but you still expect it to do a full day, and that's how I feel. So it's funny you bring that up, but that's definitely something that I really try and maintain.
Yeah. And a lot of that can be also psychologically, we can think, oh, I didn't get to bed at 8, so therefore I didn't have as good quality sleep. But the brain is very clever and the brain is very good at adapting. And actually one of the things that you do, Nick, is wake up at the same time every day. Now that's one of the best things that you can do for sleep. And so sometimes we actually use sleep restriction to improve people's sleep. It sounds mad, but actually what we're doing is we're essentially, resetting the circadian rhythm. And what the studies show and what the research shows is if you wake up at the same time every day, even if you're absolutely knackered, what your body will naturally do is it will then become bedtime at 11 for you every day, and it can sometimes be a really challenging process, but it works. And sometimes we do think, oh, I slept so terribly, I slept 2 hours last night. We'll see that patient's sleep study and actually they slept 6 hours, but they're just psychologically feeling like they didn't sleep the whole time. And so having that deep sleep, that REM sleep, is super important. But in some cases sleep studies can be useful if you're feeling like, in general, your sleep's a little bit off. But again, it's something that we do in preventative healthcare medicine.
Amazing. Our mum and our grands were always right. You always need a good night's sleep. You'll be better after a good night's sleep.
It's true.
So, okay, well, so to people listening to this, we do have quite a range of a demographic from an age point of view, obviously male and females. Let's talk through in decades, because again, what I see a lot of is, like people my age trying to do things that 30-year-olds are being told to do, and vice versa, so it's like, actually, what should we be focusing on? So if we start like from, for example, and I appreciate male and females will be different, but what are the things that you could recommend that is worth our energy and also going to give us the biggest return for our longevity and health? So starting from the 30s, what should they be focusing on?
I mean, your 30s are obviously focused a lot on working life and fertility. So at this point, in your 20s and 30s, you're going to be thinking about, okay, how do I feel energized? One of the really important things is creating those habits and really solidifying those habits, healthy habits, so that when you move forward, when it becomes a little bit harder to exercise as well, when time can be challenging because you have your family, it's about creating those patterns and those things that you can stick to that are sustainable. So, focusing on diet, good supplements, and trying to just incorporate exercise and movement into your everyday life. I think that's the best thing you can do for yourself, in your 30s, because it is harder to, if you can, it's never too late. If you suddenly start exercising in your, 50s, 60s, you can still make a big improvement. If you had those to start with, if you have that foundation, your life's going to be easier later.
Amazing. Let's get the reps in early, right? And then what about in their 40s then?
Yeah, so 40s, okay, so now we're starting to think about, quite often you hear about this midlife crisis, and it's, focusing more so on, the body starts to age. And so at that point, we're thinking more about supplementation. So, for females, in the later 40s, there comes perimenopause, and then later menopause. In men, testosterone levels start to decline in our 40s, and usually that's the time where actually career-wise, people are usually at their peak by this point. So it's about optimizing what you already have. But if you have that good foundation that you built in your 20s and 30s, you're good. But again, it's never too late to start. So at this point, we're thinking more about, energy. How do we maintain that energy? And now we're starting to focus on anti-aging at this point. And so that's where the shift sort of happens, I think, in your 40s.
Thing is, psychologically, as you say earlier, it's that you've got that big milestone coming up. It's like people in their 30s worry about their 40s, and then their 40s are worry about their 50s, and these milestones of our chronological aging, do have an impact on us. And you've mentioned supplements twice. This again is a great time to probably go and get some bloods done, isn't it? To work out what supplements are going to actually aid you, rather than hearing it from your mate who's going, I'm taking this, you need to take that. And then they take that, and then they're just spending X amount of pounds a month, and actually it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
Is that what you would suggest then?
Definitely. And I think, as we sort of enter our 40s, definitely that's a really great time to do a really comprehensive health check. And, you might start to think at that point more so about, how do I want to do, cancer screening? Do I want to check my heart? Do I want to check my VO2 max? Do I want to see if, it all depends on what you want and what your goals are. But in terms of the supplements, I always say, keep it simple and make sure what you're doing is going to be sustainable. If you're going to take anything at all, it would be vitamin D, hands down. We all know about vitamin D, doctors bang on about it, but it really is so important, for the overall metabolism of the body, for your bone health, for the mood, for sharpness, clarity. Vitamin D is the big, that's the one, It helps you absorb calcium. Vitamin K2 tells your body where to put it in. So that's why people are doing the, vitamin D with the K2. And you have to take it, because if you're out in the sun, yes, you get the vitamin D. But if you put on sunblock, which of course we encourage, your body's not going to absorb the vitamin D. So I would say that's, one of the main, that's definitely the number one. If you're going to take, if you're not a supplement person, that's one that you must take.
Yeah.
And take a decent dose of it, because it's very to pop into a health food shop and buy, a supplement with vitamin D that's generally tends to be very little. 2,000 international units as an adult is what you want to be taking as minimum, really. But it's a good idea to get a health check, because then you can see what your levels are. And sometimes they just end up being really, really low, and you need a top up of a higher dose of vitamin D for a few weeks. And then after that, you can do the maintenance dose. But that's definitely the number one.
Yeah.
2, I would say take a good overall, general multivitamin or compound, whether if that's athletic greens or whatever it is, just a general overall one. And then depending on your age, you can then, add in other ones as and when you need to. So for example, if you're, someone in your women in your 30s, you want to have a baby, you want to be focusing on those supplements like folic acid, for example, that, is really essential for fertility. And then moving on to your 40s, we talk now, about things like, creatine, NMN, resveratrol, you're at that point that it starts to be more about anti-aging. Anti-aging, essentially, if you think about it, as our cells age, they become diseased. So actually by anti-aging from the inside, what you're doing is you're giving your body the best possible chance to live a healthier life, And then as we come to our later years, The focus may be more so on, how do I boost my energy? How do I look after my bones? Taking things like calcium supplements. So yeah, I think it's about having the fundamental kind of basic vitamin D, multivitamin, and then adding in what you need depending on what phase of life you're in.
So we're now going to go into our 50s, and obviously that's my category, and you've hit my supplement protocol on the nail on the head. So I take a very strong vitamin D, even though I'm in the sun, and with K2. I also take calcium tablets as well, quite a high dose of them, because obviously one of my results was because of my back injury, I ended up with severe osteoporosis of the spine, and is considered that it was through the steroids, etc., that I had, that's where it came, because I went from being very healthy to not. And what's great is because it's not a genetic setup for me, I am having an impact with my training. You talk about lifting earlier, and those supplements. So, before I was like, get my stuff from food, now I'm like, where's my supplements? It's like, I'm taking them. And I also take a B12. And again, that was recommended because of my right side bunching and vasovagal, and so good for heart health. And then I'm taking magnesium. Now, before, I never took magnesium because like I said, my sleep, I'm pretty much like a switch. Within a few minutes, I'm out. I do ask myself every morning before I look at any wearable data, how do I think I slept? And it was always great. It was always great. But what I have noticed with a really good magnesium, so I take 2. Generally, I try and take them an hour before bed, but sometimes it's literally when I'm getting ready for bed, that my deep sleep has increased.
Okay.
Right. And I would say increase from an average of 14, 15, 16% to 21 to 23%.
Oh, wow.
And I'm feeling a massive benefit of taking them. Yes, that's what I'm doing as a 50-year-old. Where else should people be focusing, not just with supplements, but other things that they should be doing?
Yeah. I think we mentioned earlier, didn't we, that it's never too late to make those changes. And really at this point, the nutrition is also really, really important. And, the easiest way to kind of optimize that and to improve your nutrition is by totally just trying to minimize the amount of processed foods that you eat. So what we know is that if we're eating more clean, plant-based, non-processed foods, that's one of the best things you can do. And, sometimes when you're younger, life can be busy, perhaps in our 50s, we find that we can, take care of ourselves in that way a little bit more. Sometimes we may have more time. So I think definitely a focus on nutrition and clean, lean protein, making sure your saturated fats aren't, consumption isn't too high, making sure that the good cholesterol that you consume, avocados, nut seeds, olive oil, improving your HDL, the high density lipoprotein, good cholesterol, it is also really beneficial. I would say nutrition is a nice, easy way to optimize your health in your 50s. The sleep, we've talked about that at length. Sleep is super, super important. Our cells need it to restore themselves. Lots of different processes happen in our sleep. As time goes on, as more and more research has been, conducted into this, we're finding that, we need less sleep as we get older, but the quality of sleep that we get is so, so important. In the 50s, I think that those two things are important. Stress management, so, stress can lead to oxidative stress in the body, and that can lead to, a whole domino effect of, difficult things can happen, challenging medical conditions, to manage sometimes. So, stress management, I think, is another thing in your 50s, because it depends on where you are, like you say, in your career, your family life, etc. But I think, style changes, I think, are really important as well in your 50s, as well as meditation.
I think the thing is as well, like, touched on 2 things there, like obviously with nutrition, one of the things that how I sort of have it in my head is I eat more good than not. and I try and do it on a percentage. So like, if I'm trying to be super healthy, then I would say 90%, 95% of what goes in my body is good for me. And for those people that don't quite understand what good for them is, when you were talking about processed, and obviously then you got ultra high processed foods. So, I focus on as minimal amount of ingredients in as possible. So more single ingredient foods.
That's it. Yeah, whole foods.
And the rainbow, right? Eat as much color as we can.
Yeah. That's a good tip.
So that's how I do it. And what you were also saying is about having a bit more time. It's certainly your children tend to be that little bit older. Maybe they're gone to university or things like that. You're dealing with empty nest. For certain people, I know that that's quite challenging. For me, I was quite excited about it. But you do have more time. And then all of a sudden, what I find, what I find is now that it's just me and my wife that we're cooking for. We can cook for our tastes and our needs, rather than going, okay, well, they don't like that, so we won't do prawns tonight. And they don't like that, so rather than cooking 3-4 different meals, you'd cook a meal that was okay for everyone, but you would make some compromise, which obviously when you're able to just focus on your own nutrition, it's a lot easier to obviously put that at the forefront and make better choices. That's what I've done anyway in the 50s.
It's nice. It's making more time for yourself, which is...
Yeah. And now as we go on to the 60s, because that is my next big milestone, I'm 54 in a couple of months. So I have my eye on that prize. And I do see it as a prize. It's a gift, to age. And so in our 60s, where do we need to be putting our focus?
Yeah. 60 is the new 50. So... And actually, when we talk about things like, health span, for example, peak span, it's very easy for us to, think, oh, okay, we're getting older. But actually, in terms of peak span, you're at your peak when it comes to, the intelligence, the knowledge that you have, the experience that you have. You have this wealth of, experience from times that have happened and gone by. And so it's a really interesting phase of life, I would say. And certainly for many people, the beginning of, time to really enjoy. If you're lucky enough to retire in your 60s, this is a whole new time where, you spend more time, traveling, doing the things that you always wanted to do. So in a way, it's a new beginning. It's one of the number 9s. It's really a time for change. One of the things, when we talked about, things like exercise, the way that we do, exercise, the way that we sleep, and stress management, that they'll change. They change in your 60s because things do start to slow down. People do the opposite and they speed up in their 60s, which is fantastic. But, it all depends on, your goals at the time, what you want to achieve. But certainly, when it comes to things like supplements in your 60s, I think at this stage, it's really, really important to be doing your health checks, because this is where, this is a time where, deficiencies and things will sort of start popping up, and deficiencies that you probably never had before. And, testing is really important, scanning if you have the means, to uncover things early, rather than waiting for them to happen. So preventative health is, really, really important in your 60s, and it's not too late. Often people will say, oh, I should have done this in my 40s. Well, no, because actually you've still got, a long life ahead. So it's really about, trying to optimize your health for the, next 20 to 30 years plus.
Well, do you know what? It's like, it's when you were talking, I was just thinking about, again, when I was growing up, I look at my parents when they were like my age, and, God, I remember when my mum was like in her 30s and I thought she was so old. Like, no. Our picture of what aging looked like is very different to what aging is now. And you saying, 60s are the new 50s and things, certainly we can have a very positive impact on that being true, and everything that you said, where things naturally decline, they don't have to. Yeah. Right. And we can make those changes. And this is where you say, like, having those screenings and that can show you where, you're getting those declines that you didn't know. so you can do something about it. But like we talked off camera and I said that I played a lot of paddle, and anyone following me on my socials will know it's my new thing, my new obsession. I played paddle yesterday with people, obviously late 20s, 30s, 40s, but up to 60s, 70s, and even an 81-year-old, right? And this particular guy, he's an incredible guy. His zest for life at 81 is just inspiring. And his ability to get around the core still. And I mean, he is very capable of beating. He's a good level player, right? You know, and I remember the first time I played him, I was almost like, oh, there you go. And I gave him a gentle serve. Never again. I mean, he flew it back at me and it like sliced it, won the point. And I was like, and you know, and I just think some of those people didn't start taking their health seriously until they'd finished their career.
Yeah.
And then they start taking it. So like you referred to earlier, clearly the more reps and the more care we put in, right, when we're younger is an advantage, but it is not the thing.
That's
because we are well aware of people that didn't do anything that then started taking it seriously again in those latter years. They've had incredible. It's like they find a new energy, a new way of living, don't they?
Yeah. And you know, and we're living longer, you know.
Yeah.
We're living longer than we ever used to. And, you know, it's never too late to start. If you found that, you know, you didn't live, you know, the healthiest life in your younger years, you know, it's not too late. And I think, you know, it's interesting you touched on, you know, this 80-year-old who is playing paddle and is loving it, and he's, you know, he's competition for you. And he's, you know, many, many years older. But if we look...
And by the way, he's one of a few. He's not just 180. There's a few of them out here which are formidable.
Well, that's, you know, fantastic. You know, if we look at, say, the blue zones, so you may have heard of the blue zones. So if we look at, you know, there are, you know, patterns that we see in these areas, and I think you've touched on a couple of them, because, you know, the people, Ventrinians, you know, the people that are living till 100 have, you know, these same patterns. And one of the things that they do regularly is exercise. The other is community. And if you think about it, you know, going to play paddle with your friends that, you know, you didn't know a couple of years ago, you know, you're doing two of those things. It's a community and you're exercising. There are other things too, like nutrition, a support network. But, you know, I think that's a really nice way to do it in the modern world, because, you know, unfortunately, you know, in central London, in your little bubble, you know, you don't have that village and the ocean and the Mediterranean next to you. But, you know, there are ways that you can do it. And this is a really good example of that, I think.
Definitely. And it's that belonging, right? You touched on it. It's that belonging. So we're going to do one more decade. And it's not like, you know, obviously this podcast is about living to 100, right? We could carry on, but this is just purely for time. So anyone in their 70s, where should they be focusing on?
Yeah. So now I think, again, it's not too late to do your preventative checks, you know, do your bloods, do your scans. If there are, you know, things that can pop, you know, it's about doing things like cancer screening, actually. You know, at this stage, you know, our cells are getting like much, much older, you know, and what you want to be doing is screening for all the, you know, sort of basic cancer tests that you can do, whether if that's, you know, a fit test for the stool, or doing a colonoscopy, or, you know, checking the lungs because you've smoked a lot during your time. But, you know, speak to your doctor and whoever it is, just to kind of figure out, like, what testing do we need to focus on at this stage. So I think it's catching things early, getting them treated, then optimizing. And again, looking out for deficiencies at that point. You know, bone health is really important at this stage in your life. And you know, we naturally start to eat a little bit less as we get older. So adapting your nutrition for your needs at that point is really important as well. Again, you know, some people, you know, I have patients who feel the most energized that they've ever felt, you know, in their 70s, because now they're sort of free and they're living life the way they always wanted to do it. You know, it's yeah, it can be a really, really wonderful era. Yeah, again, it's about doing those basic things and just zoning in on on the things that are important, like at that stage in your life, like bone health, for example, and nutrition.
Yeah. And do you know what? I think the common denominator when I was listening to you there and thinking about the people I currently surround myself with in their 60s, 70s and 80s, is they have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
They just have a lot of fun. And this is where, again, like longevity and health, let's not let it overtake everything else that we do in life, right? I have this saying, let health happen in the background. It's do lots of good little things and just let it happen organically.
Yeah. And live your life. Life is for living, isn't it?
It is. Well, listen, I could talk to you for ages and ages, but I know that I have to let you go. But before I do that, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you were hoping I would, or that you feel that through our conversation needs a little bit of airspace?
I think we've covered sort of, most of the things that I would want to talk about when talking to, general population about their health. But I think what's really important is that, like we mentioned at the beginning, there is a lot of noise out there and there is a lot of misinformation out there. So it's really, really important that you're guided by the right physician and by people with credibility, and, just making sure that the sources, so where you're getting this information from, is somewhere that's, legitimate. So I think definitely, encouraging people to look in the right places for the information that they're looking for. Chatty, good old chatty GPT isn't always the most accurate. So I would say take things with a pinch of salt, and make sure you speak to your doctor. That's one of my big sort of take homes at the moment.
Definitely, and I think I would just add on to that, as if in a world of so much noise and so many people popping up and things like that, and obviously if you're on social media, the algorithm will go, oh, you like longevity, here's another 20, 30 experts. If you find one that works for you, just focus on listening to that one, because you will always find someone that doesn't agree with that, so find one that works for you, right, and stick with it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.
So, Dr. Simmy, you've been amazing. I really do appreciate your time, your energy, and your input into this. And I hope that people listening to this are not only just taking some nuggets away to live longer, healthier, maintain that peak span life, but actually get inspired to start, wherever they are, to know that actually it is a choice. Yeah. And we can still make that choice no matter where we are in our journey of health.
Exactly that.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Nick. See you.
See ya.